Welcome to Awaken the Sixth Sense, a how-to guide to unlocking psychic abilities. In every episode, you'll be immersed in profound knowledge and at-home, hands-on practices straight from experts who will help activate and spark your innate gifts. I'm your host, Emilio Ortiz. For the first half-decade of my 20s, I've embarked on a relentless search to deepen my understanding of both my inner and outer world. My mission is to facilitate a link between the wayshowers of the new consciousness and the emerging visionaries and leaders of tomorrow, which is you. In today's episode, you will learn about channeling extraterrestrials, what they have to say, and how to contact them. Our guest today is Elizabeth April. She's an intuitive psychic and an interdimensional messenger who has had experiences with galactic beings. She often speaks of an organization that she calls the Galactic Federation of Light, a governing body that brings together intelligent entities across the cosmos. Her role is to act as a galactic ambassador across conscious beings out there in the whole universe. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth. I'm so excited to have you here.
I am so excited to be here. It's nice to be in person with you.
It's so nice, and this is our second time coming across each other, and where do we even start? You know, I think right now with the universe being so vast, so mysterious, we don't even really know what's out there. And a lot of people are asking the same questions about extraterrestrials, about galactic beings out there. And I wanted to ask you, since you've had a lot of experience with this, what is an extraterrestrial in your worldview?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say a being that you think about even the definition of extraterrestrial, right? I mean, you could easily say it's a being that's not terrestrial, but then again, what does that mean? I would say a being that is not from this planet, an incarnation in a different dimension. And there's a lot of different words that we could use: alien, interdimensional being, extraterrestrial. So it is hard to pin down and define, but I would say overall a being that isn't necessarily from planet Earth, and that leaves the entire universe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you were 18 years old, you were doing a Vipassana retreat, and you got consciously abducted.
Yeah.
And you've told this story many times, but really I wanted to ask, can you share why this particular moment opened the whole ET can of worms for you and started you on this new journey in your life?
I mean, leading up to that point, I was really questioning everything. I was not happy with the way that society was or my position within it. I didn't know who I was. So I started to explore things like the Akashic Records and past lifetimes and remote viewing and deep states of trance meditation. But if you had asked me if I believed in aliens, I'd say, yeah, for sure. There's got to be something out there in the universe, but why would they be here? Why would they bother with us? You know, I really looked at humanity as this little ant-like species. So I was really not interested in aliens before that. So to get abducted, to have an in-person, one-on-one experience with beings from off-planet, it really did dismantle my entire understanding of this reality. And it opened up this whole can of worms of, okay, then who are they? Why are they here? And why are they interested in us? Why are they abducting not just me, but many other humans all across the planet? And that really began my search for the questions, for the truth. And I was able to apply the skills that I had been working with, such as remote viewing and deep states of trance meditation or channeling information, to the questions that I now had about extraterrestrials. Yeah.
It's really interesting you mentioned remote viewing, Akashic Records. These are psychic abilities that we're going to be covering on this show. And I feel like when you say that, once you activate one, a whole can of worms open up again with the other psychic abilities. So I'm really curious, specifically with the extraterrestrials, what were these initial signs that you could actually communicate with these beings? You know, you had been training yourself, you had been equipping yourself with these, new abilities that you were activating. But this one in particular, how did you know the initial signs?
Yeah, there was two things that happened after the abduction. Because once again, the abduction just opened up the reality that they're here, they're real, and they're interacting with us. And so the first thing that happened was I had a past life flashback of myself as one of these extraterrestrials. And that opened up my world as far as, okay, well, I'm not just a human, or I haven't just been a human before, which also made me feel quite at home with the understanding of extraterrestrial presence here on planet Earth. It made me feel like I was a part of that, and that also validated why I didn't feel a part of this, right? So that flashback to that past lifetime really opened up my comfortability with extraterrestrials. And then after that, I started to get telepathic messages from ETs. And at first I didn't know that they were extraterrestrial. They were just telepathic messages, downloads. A lot of it was about quantum physics.
They were teaching you.
They were teaching me, exactly. So it was very different than the information that I had received before. And before that, I was receiving information from spirit guides, from my higher self, from past life selves, but not extraterrestrials. And eventually one day I said, who are you? I want to know who you are. Who is this?
So conscious intention, you ask them, show yourself.
Exactly. And the response I got was, you probably don't want to see me.
Really?
And I said, no, I really do. And they're like, you're what did they say? You're not going to be comfortable with my appearance. And I said, it doesn't matter. I really want to see who you are. And immediately there was this very typical looking gray face with the big black eyes that appeared right in my mind's eye, and I had a roommate at the time, and I said, oh my God, there's a face in my face. And she's like, what? And I closed my eyes. I'm like, there's a face in my face. And I open my eyes and he's not there. And I close my eyes and once again, that ET face is right there. And yeah, it was different. I'd never, other than the abduction, I really didn't know that it was an ET that was teaching me this whole time. So that's kind of how that unfolded and how I was able to start really getting in contact with them.
And no one warns us about what an ET looks like. We've had from movies and characters that we can sort of place into an imagery, but when you're seeing this being for the first time, and it must be an incredible experience that just blows your mind completely. So if someone is, again, trying to be perceptive, they want to open themselves up to communicating and engaging with these beings, how do they get over the fear part, or the novelty of what they look like beyond, just that?
Absolutely. I think that the fear of extraterrestrials is probably the biggest hurdle that all of us want to overcome. Yeah. I think as a starseed, we have that question, which is, who are they? And we want to know and we want to engage, but I think the human part of us is fearful because they're so different. The fear comes from a place of not knowing. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what they look like. You don't know what their intentions are. So it's that fear of the unknown, I think, that holds us back. And what I would recommend for people to overcome that fear is to expose yourself to extraterrestrials maybe more so in the mainstream. So maybe it is watching a YouTube video of someone who channels them. Maybe it is watching or reading an article about who the Greys are or who the Pleiadians are. And that information is going to open us up to more of that contact because it lessens the fear. So I would say the more exposure we can get in our day-to-day lives, just from the content and resources that we have available to us, is going to help us with the fear, because all of a sudden there isn't the fear of the unknown there anymore. And then we're much more receptive to them.
Yeah. And I think one thing we'll learn throughout the series is that all of these abilities have embedded underlying something that is consciousness, and something that we are currently beginning to understand what consciousness really is. So having all this experience with the other abilities and now channeling extraterrestrials, how did you start training yourself in, let me on the spot connect with my extraterrestrial beings that are here helping me, guiding me, giving me information, teaching me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big believer that everyone has access to all of these abilities, to mediumship, to channeling, to hopping different timelines, to astral traveling and remote viewing. We all have access to all of them, right? All of the clairs, which is really important for people to understand. Now, I think individually people resonate or pick up on maybe one or another ability a little bit faster. For me, my access to all of those abilities was through deep states of meditation and deep states of trance. And it sounds scary, or it sounds overwhelming, or it sounds like you have to study, many, many hours to get there. But I believe that it's a very natural state of being, and that it doesn't take too long to get to that place. But essentially, trance channeling is about quieting and shutting off your human, quieting that ego mind, quieting the thoughts, quieting the to-do list, quieting, what time is it and where do I have to be when. It's getting into a place where none of this, none of your senses, the room itself just simply doesn't exist. And when I was able to get into that place of trance, of nothingness, and then also everything, I was able to connect with my past lifetimes, with passed away loved ones, with extraterrestrials. I believe that that is the doorway or the gateway to everything, is to get into that place where you're no longer entangled with or connected to this human presence. And that's when you're connected to the higher self, the consciousness, and that's when the whole world opens up. That ability, that skill allowed me to connect with extraterrestrials. And I'll mention one more thing. At the beginning of my trance meditation and deep states, it would take me a very long time to access any information. And I remember having a friend in front of me, and I said, hey, can I practice my channeling on you? Can I receive information for you? And they said, yeah, sure. And I remember sitting there for 25, 30 minutes, trying to shut off my mind, trying to disconnect from this reality. And I was sweating buckets because I just had a person looking at me, expecting some sort of profound answer, and me thinking, it's whatever it is, it's not going to be good enough. And
We're trying too hard.
I was trying way too hard, and I had to let all of that go in order to receive an image or a telepathic message for them. And that's how I started. And it was about 2 or 3 years of taking that long to get information. And these days, people see me channel, and it's 2 seconds of closing my eyes, quieting my mind, shutting off all of my senses to connect. And they don't understand how long it took me to get to that place that I am now. And it's important for people to realize that it does take work and effort and time.
Yeah. As you said, someone that sees you right now, you channeled for me in our podcast we did, and it was like an instant, 10 seconds and you're there, and you receive all these messages that flow to you instantly. But I'd love to walk people through, again, that process of trance channeling, maybe even explaining it from a perspective of quantum physics, how we can really access dissolving from our body and seeing everything, from a different lens.
Yeah, and it can be a difficult process to even describe. But within the realm of quantum mechanics, when we're not observing the reality around us, it technically doesn't exist. It's technically in a flow state. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing often is closing my eyes in a very busy setting. Because the second that we close our eyes, we're no longer observing the reality around us. Therefore, the reality around us technically is in something called a wave state. So this table right here in between us, it's not actually solid, right? We're observing it as solid.
It appears as matter.
It appears as matter. But that matter, when we're not observing it, starts to dissolve, and it becomes a wave state, which is an atomic state. So everything starts to just be atoms floating around. The second we open our eyes again, it's solid, it's material, it's perceived as solid. And so that's, I think, the most important part about getting into that trance state is closing our eyes. And that's why it's important for me when I do channel or tap into other dimensions or other beings is to have my eyes closed so that I'm no longer observing this reality and I get to, with my intention, observe other realities. So if I were to describe a process, sitting down, getting comfortable. Sometimes if sitting can be too uncomfortable for people, I would say lay down. Make sure that the temperature is right. This is where something like a deprivation tank would come in handy, right? You are deprived of all of your senses.
A Vipassana retreat.
Exactly.
Just hope that you won't get abducted.
And once you are in that state deprived of your senses, that is when you can fully disconnect from your body. Now, at first, it was important for me to not be too hot, not be too cold, not be too hungry, not be too full, not be in a position where my back hurt or my knee hurt or my foot hurt or I was feeling the breeze on me. I had to be in a place where I was truly deprived of my senses in order to tap in. These days, I'm able to be cold, be tired, be uncomfortable, be hungry, and once again separate from that experience in order to tap in. So what I would recommend is get to a place where you can fully relax, fully disconnect from the senses. And once you're in that place, continue to deepen the relaxation. And this is what we experience when we go through QHHT or other sort of past life regression type of techniques. Relax, relax, relax. And at the point where you can relax your body enough, you can then separate from your body. And this is where remote viewing, astral traveling can happen because you're removing your consciousness from the physical state. And then what's really important about connecting with extraterrestrials, or really any ability that you want, is to set an intention. So I always say that channeling is like tapping into a universal Google. So if you can imagine having Google on your computer screen, and you've got
or
that...
ChatGPT, a little bit more up to date on that.
Okay, cool. For all the Gen Zs out there.
Even before channeling, you mentioned we need to get into that state of trance. How do you really know you're there? Because in the beginning, you said that you were hours and hours or a long time sitting in there trying to get to that state, and now you could do it in 2 minutes. How do you know you're there?
When everything about your present state dissolves. When the hunger goes away, when the tiredness goes away, when nothing else exists. And I like to describe channeling as a Google search. And so if you could imagine having your computer open and you've got that Google search bar, what do you want to know? Right? In a sense, Google is access to infinite amounts of information contained within this dimension or planet Earth. And when we get into that trance state, we've got the universal search. But you can't just show up to Google and say, tell me what I need to know. Google won't respond with anything. You need a specific intention. You need to ask Google a specific question in order to get the answers. Very similar. Once you find yourself in that trance state, once this reality, this body dissolves, then what? A lot of people get there, they don't recognize that they're there, and they're just waiting for something to happen. And then they're like, well, I can't get there, or it doesn't happen for me, or I'm blocked. And that's actually not the case. The case is they're there, and they just don't have an intention to take it to the next step, which is to receive the information or to connect with extraterrestrials or to see a past lifetime or to get out of their body or whatever it is that you want. But you have to go in with it. You have to go into it with an intention, a clarity. And that's when we start to receive.
Yeah. So when you began exploring the realm of ETs, I think asking questions really requires us to be extremely curious and open to any possibility, any situation. So maybe to start, people off, what were some of the questions that you were asking specifically about ETs that, you wanted answers to?
Everything, like all across the board. I think some of my really big questions at the beginning are questions that humanity just has in general. Who is God? You know? Is this reality a simulation? There was other questions that they weren't able to answer, which is like, this is gonna sound so silly, okay? This was 10 years ago. Should I go out with this guy? Like, is this the one? Is this gonna be my husband? You know, like those were the kind of, and they're like, yeah, we're not here for that. You know, they wouldn't tell me off, but they would just say, you're literally wasting our time with a question of like, should I date this guy? You know? So that was just me being young and excited and wanting all the information, even information that didn't really pertain to them whatsoever. And then I would ask like other like simple questions like, where do you live? And what is it like living on a spaceship? And do you eat food? And if you do, what does it look like? Do you go to the bathroom? Do you have romantic partners or not? And so some of those questions are really fun to ask as well, extraterrestrials, because you just never really know what to expect. And depending on the species of the extraterrestrial that you're talking to, you're always going to get a different response. So there truly is just such an infinite amount of information out there.
You said depending on the species.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in your life where you were in your college dorm room and you got visited by an extraterrestrial being, and they said, you know, I want you to be up at 2 a.m. We're going to take you somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on this?
Yeah. So I was just hanging out with my friends in my living room at the time, and I was starting to feel really dizzy, really lightheaded, kind of this vertigo, and I said, you know what, guys, like, keep hanging out. I'm gonna go lay down in my room. And I didn't know it at the time, but that's a sign that they wanted to contact me. So I go into my room, I close my eyes, I lay down, and immediately there is this, 7-foot tall Pleiadian being in his astral body, not physical, walking through the corner of my room. And this experience was so new to me that, I opened my eyes, he wasn't there. Closed my eyes, oh, he was there. Opened my eyes, and I did this because I was just so taken aback by this presence. And he told me that in 2 days' time, I had to be up at a certain time. I think it was 2 or 4 a.m. or something. It was like Eastern Standard. And he said, I'll come get you, but you're invited to a meeting, and you need to be awake. You need to be conscious for it. So I was a student at the time in university, and I was used to all-nighters. So yeah, it was 2 a.m. So I set my alarm for 1. I chugged back a coffee, and I meditated. And at 2 a.m. on the dot, on the day that he said he was coming, he walked in the room, and he said, follow me. And at that point, I didn't know if I was going to be fully physically abducted or if it was an astral travel thing. And it turned out to be an astral travel or remote view experience. And I did. I followed him out of my room, and we ended up having the first Galactic Federation meeting that I'd ever been to. And at the time, I didn't know that this organization of extraterrestrials was called the Galactic Federation. I mean, that's how new I was to all of that. And that was a very revealing meeting at that time.
And this meeting was held on the moon, and different species from all over the cosmos were there discussing what exactly?
Discussing everything, but it was mostly about the energy shift that was about to take place on planet Earth, or that was starting to take place on planet Earth, and information that we needed to know about the shift. And part of that, there was a lot of information within it, and part of it was that there could be a cataclysmic event that could take place, which would be, they called it darkness, like days of darkness. And the way that they described it was the Earth getting hit with some sort of electromagnetic frequency that would wipe out electronics. Now I understand it as a solar flare, but I believe that it would actually be something like a cosmic radiation event. And it gets kind of scientific, but essentially, if there is some sort of supernova that happens or a star that dies within our solar system or around our solar system, the radiation from that impact, the energetic ripples from that impact would hit our solar system, and it would actually move through the sun. And by moving this energy moving past the sun, it would, how do I say this, create solar waves that would hit planet Earth. So it wouldn't necessarily be a solar event, it would be a cosmic radiation event that would create solar radiation for the planet. So they were describing that, and at that point in time, I started to be a prepper. I started to kind of prepare for an event like this, and that was back in 2011. So I've kind of been a bit of a prepper ever since.
By all the tuna cans.
Exactly. I've always had a box of food, stored away in my closet, and I've always been called crazy for it. But still to this day, I like to be prepared for the worst case, and if shit hits the fan a little bit, then I do feel prepared, and I do let other people know to be prepared as well.
And now your relationship with this federation has evolved since then, and you've actually become sort of like an ambassador for the Galactic Federation. You talk to your community through the Galactic Federation, what is going on the planet. You're asking so many different questions. So how did you get to the point where you could go up to wherever the Galactic Federation is and receive these messages for humanity? How did that happen?
Yeah, so after that meeting in the moon, after I first got introduced to them, I discovered their Galactic Federation mothership that hangs out in the solar system, in our solar system. And I would remote view up there once a month. At first, it was like almost every day because I was just so excited and I wanted to meet everyone.
Yeah, you've made friends there.
Exactly. And they really did invite me in with open arms, which was really beautiful. And so I kept that a secret, right? So that all happened. I got introduced to them in 2011. I did not go online to talk about the information that I was receiving from them until 2016. But even in my videos, I would say, I've been downloading this or channeling this insight, never saying that I was channeling it from an organization of extraterrestrials. And then 2020 happened. And for the first time, they said, you need to tell people that you're connected with us and that we have a message for humanity. And that was the first time I ever got on camera and I said, I have a message from an organization called the Galactic Federation of Light. And that video reached more people than I had reached since 2016.
Talk to us a little bit about getting the courage to that point. Obviously, you were told you need to tell humanity, and I think that propelled you to actually be like, okay, they're telling me this, let me spread the message. But maybe for a lot of people that are opening themselves up in perception to different galactic beings, what do they tell their family? What do they tell their friends? Like, how do you actually create the courage to be able to speak your truth? This is my reality. This is what's going on right now. How do you get to that point?
It was a pretty rapid progression to that point. So the second that I started having flashbacks of myself as an extraterrestrial and learned about the Galactic Federation and had the abduction, and had the one-on-one experience of, this is real, this is really happening. I, quote unquote, came out to my family as an alien. I literally sat my mom down.
Can't imagine that conversation, okay?
It was awkward to say the least, but I felt like I needed the people that I loved the most to know who I really was. And I still can't believe I had that conversation to this day, but I told my mom, I said, you're my mom in this moment, in this lifetime, but I'm really not Elizabeth, and I'm really an extraterrestrial, and I'm really here to help humanity, and I actually have other parents in other dimensions, and she just didn't understand. But I had to tell her that I was not really a human, and she just started crying, and she's like, what do you mean I'm not your mom? And I'm like, I don't even know how to describe it, but I just felt the desire to tell her and to tell my family, and it was a really tough conversation to have. And oddly enough, 2 months after I told my mom that I wasn't really Elizabeth, a giant UFO came to visit her in her backyard, and she was there with my stepdad. And this thing, she said it was 50 feet from the house, it came down, and they both walked to the edge of the fence in their backyard staring at this thing. And the only thing that they said to each other, they looked at each other and said, do you see that too? And there was an acknowledgement of, yes, I see that too. And just as quickly as it came, it left. And after that night of telling my mom and having the emotional reaction, I asked my guides, I said, can you please help? Like, can you please help this conversation along?
You asked.
I asked them to help her understand who I was. And then 2 months later, she had contact. And ever since then, she's been reading my book, watching all of my podcasts, all of my videos. She's at the front row of every lecture that I do. I mean, she is truly my biggest fan.
Yeah, and it sometimes has to take that validation of seeing a UFO 60 feet above you to be able to believe.
Exactly. And so that's kind of the hard leap that I think a lot of people have to make with extraterrestrials and making that contact is you can know about it as much as possible, but it's very different of having that knowledge and then taking that leap to have the true experience. And I think that sometimes we have the experience before the knowledge, just like I did. And I think sometimes we have to have the knowledge before we have the experience.
And describing all these different species that you talked about the Pleiadians, the Greys. I'd really like people to understand that there are different species, of course, like out there in the whole vastness of the universe. How did you begin to relate to the different ones, and what are some characteristics, traits that each individual species has, and so people can identify them?
Yeah, so it was actually that first meeting in the center of the moon that introduced me to all of the variety of species. So I was there.
Everyone was there.
Everyone was there. Everyone who was anyone was there, apparently.
Other humans as well?
Yeah, other humans in astral form. So I could see all of the astral bodies that were there in that meeting. Yeah. And then there was basically like stands, you could say, seats. And there was different extraterrestrials who were in the seats, and there was 2 per species. So it was like 2 representative from each species that were connected with the Galactic Federation were there. So I didn't realize how rude this probably was, but I went around the stands in my astral body because I was free to roam around, and I was just like looking at everyone. And at the time, I didn't know that they could see me in my astral body, because usually remote viewing, other humans can't see remote viewers, but extraterrestrials can. So I was basically creeping on all of the beings who were there in the audience. And there was like little ones that looked like those little like troll dolls when you were like a kid. I mean, 90s, kid is the 90s, little troll dolls. There were ones that were more like gelatinous. Okay. There were really, really large ones that were 10 feet tall that looked very humanoid. There were ones that looked like animalistic, like cat-like, or even reptilian, So it's quite diverse, let's just say. And each of these species, oddly enough, have kind of humanoid or humanistic traits in one way or another. So there is this level of relatability to at least some of them.
Yeah, so do you say like evolution got it right, where it's, 2 feet, we're upright, hands?
Yeah, there seems to be a commonality with when I try and describe an extraterrestrial to someone for the first time, depends on obviously who I'm describing, but it will be, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head. Like I call that kind of humanoid, right? Because it's something that we're used to. A lot of the times the toes and the fingers will be different and the face will look very different, but humanoid in that way. Yeah.
And even the variety within our species. You have all sorts of colors, eye colors, everything. Does that have anything to do with our relationship with extraterrestrials? The differentiation in our genetics, in our appearance and form?
That's a good question. I think that there's definitely that missing link with humanity where ETs, I would say a variety of ETs, have come to planet Earth and spliced their DNA with ours. So we're not just a part of one species, we're a part of many. And then I think that humans kind of went to all different places around the world, and we evolved individually that way. So I would say that every human on planet Earth is a hybrid, and we have a variety of different species within us. And then we kind of evolved in different locations. So I think that that's the variety that we're seeing, is the evolution based on location on planet Earth. But I don't think that our variety is directly linked to different species. I think that most of us are spliced with many different species, and then we evolved separately.
And you see, right now, we are living in a universe of, you described, darkness and light. And just as humans have different agendas, motivations, I think aliens is very similar with this, of their intentions. And there's light and there's dark. It's the whole spectrum. So in this process of discerning what intentions are coming your way, how would you begin to describe that for people?
I mean, discernment is the number one most important aspect of channeling. I don't recommend channeling or getting into that trance state or even wanting contact with extraterrestrials if you're not able to discern.
Yeah.
So before we make the leap into communicating with aliens and ETs, we need to first ask ourselves, do I have the discernment ability within my own life to understand between the difference of high vibration and low vibration, right? You meet someone new for the first time, and the question is, are they high vibrational or low vibrational? It's kind of hard to say, are they a good person or a bad person? Yeah. Because it's just almost too defined, right? There is a spectrum, and everyone has light and dark within them.
We all have our shadows.
Absolutely. But it's like, what is that resonance? What are they resonating at? And if you already have a difficult time differentiating the vibration of another human, you're going to have a very difficult time differentiating the vibration of an extraterrestrial or an alien. Yeah. And I think a lot of people immediately want to give their power away to any ET contact they have, because we immediately assume they're better than us because they're in a different or higher vibration.
They've got a cool ass ship out here.
Yeah, exactly. They've got technology, right, that's way more advanced than us. They have connections that are more advanced than us. So we immediately want to think of them as some sort of creator or godlike being. And that's a huge problem for humans, to immediately feel like they are better or different than us, and then we give our power away. Yeah. So it's important to, the easiest way that I would describe discernment is to tune in with something called unconditional love frequency, right? There's only that. It's difficult to feel into darkness because it can be very manipulated, right? So to ask yourself, do I feel unconditional love energy from the person sitting in front of me? Yes or no? The only extraterrestrials, at first anyway, that you want to be connecting with, if and when you do open up that ability, is ones that hold the frequency of unconditional love. Once you master discerning unconditional love from beings, then you can go into a variety of more neutral beings, lower vibrational beings, because there are things that we can learn from the whole spectrum of beings in the universe. But I would say, if we're not fine-tuned in discernment first, just go with unconditional love. So the first thing that I do when I meet any new being is before I get into a conversation, before I receive or accept any information or any sort of connection, I ask, show me unconditional love. Yeah. And it's not really showing, right? It's not a visual thing, it's a vibrational thing. And a lot of them will just start to emit that frequency. And it comes from their heart chakra. It comes from their heart chakra, and it immediately opens up, and I feel that resonance. It's the resonance of pure source frequency. It's kind of hard to describe, but once you feel it once, you know what it is, and that's who you want to talk with first. If they can't show me that, or I can't feel that from them, depending on where I'm at and what I'm looking for, I'll immediately shut that down and say, okay, not right now, and I'll just turn to someone who I know for sure has that unconditional love frequency. Yeah,
that's beautiful. And there are a lot of lessons, I believe, in darkness. And when you've explored sort of the other side that isn't unconditional love, what sort of teachings has that side also given you, the beings that are coming from that frequency?
Yeah, like the lower frequencies. I think the word that comes to mind is acceptance, right? So in observing and understanding the darkness within others, we can observe and understand the darkness within ourselves. And then there's an acceptance. It's like, how do we bring unconditional love to the lower vibrational frequencies? And it's through acceptance. And so there's a lot of lessons, and then there's a lot of like very specific lessons of understanding, you know, a lot of them want greed, or they're very greedy, they want power, they want control, they want access to more resources than they need, those kind of things, specifically for those extraterrestrials. And I think it's important to understand that some of the battles we have here on planet Earth are actually continuing out there in the universe. And to be honest, at first I was not happy with that. I really thought that they would have it figured out, or at least more figured out than we have here. So I was disappointed that there was dark and light. I was disappointed that there were politics and drama and battles and struggle for resources out in the universe. I really thought that they would be better off than us here. But once again, we're here understanding the binary system of light and dark so that we can understand the universe from a much greater perspective.
Yeah. For someone right now, they're like, wow, I really want to start activating these abilities. You know, you talked about your process of trans-channeling and getting into that state. Was there anything else that you started incorporating or that now you've learned can help accelerate those abilities and help you tune in even faster?
Yeah, I think once again, it mostly comes down to letting go of this reality, of separating from the senses, of setting an intention and tuning in. And I guess when it comes down to connecting with extraterrestrials, I would say start with your own soul group. So within our soul group, we have guardian angels, we have spirit guides, we have loved ones who have passed away from this lifetime, from other lifetimes. And because within our soul group, they have the same sort of frequency, and a lot of them have a similar mission, I would say if you're going to set an intention to contact any extraterrestrial, go to your soul group. You know, go to your spirit guides, you know. And the other thing too is like with an intention, it's really making a firm, clear statement. I am ready to connect with extraterrestrials for the highest good of all involved. And I always add that intention to really any statement that I make or any intention that I set is for the highest good of all involved. And that usually cuts through the bullshit and allows us to connect with the right beings at the right time to receive the information that we need in that moment.
I'm really curious about your soul group out there, not just in Earth, but when you started meeting all of these beings and you're communicating them, you're asking them all these questions, describe sort of your relationship with your soul group from outside, from the galactic.
Yeah, I mean, for me in particular, I have way more extraterrestrials a part of my soul group than I do terrestrials or humans. And I think it's just because I've been out there much more than I've been here. And it's just a very diverse group of beings. You know, some of them are warriors, some of them are ambassadors, some of them are leaders, some of them are healers. And I think that for all of us, we have this diverse set of spirit guides or soul group specifically to help us with certain things that we need help with in our life. So we're going to have that diversity. It's kind of like a library of information and knowledge that can assist us in the present moment. And for me, when I connect with that soul group, I think I feel a sense of family, but then I also feel a sense of longing and a little bit of that loneliness of feeling like I just want to be there. Like I just want to be with all of you, and it can be difficult to be a human sometimes.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah.
And you know, when you go about connecting with the different spectrum of vibration in these beings, you talked about this process of show me unconditional love.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you do to protect your energetic space? Because you know there could be a lot of psychic attacks, which you've talked about extensively on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
how do you protect yourself when you're engaging with all these different species and beings?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have found myself in a couple of precarious situations.
Yes, I've heard.
Both on and off planet. And I think that naturally we do when we're just curious and we're wandering around, you know? And so there's a couple of things that I do. I will bubble my energy. So I'll put like an energetic shield or a bubble around myself and my aura, which is just full of white light, pure white light. So anything that isn't aligned to the highest frequency of white light or source frequency cannot come into my space. So that's like the number one kind of protection that I usually do. I cut cords often. We can create cords between humans, but we can also create cords with extraterrestrials. I've had to tell a couple of my guides off a couple of times because they were too much in my space. I'm like, yo, back off. Like, let me do my thing.
Please knock.
Yeah, exactly. And because a lot of it is not physical, it's interdimensional. There isn't necessarily when my door is closed, don't come in. Like, there isn't necessarily those boundaries, right? They're different. And then also one thing that I do often when remote viewing and astral traveling and speaking to different beings is, if I find myself in a precarious situation and I feel like I might be followed back to my body, which is a possibility, I will bilocate, which basically means that like I will pop into different locations many, many times over before I come back to my body to ensure that I'm not followed back to my body.
Throw them off.
Throw them off
trail.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just something intuitively that I started doing, really only when I find myself in a very precarious predicament. Usually when I'm talking to the Galactic Federation, I can just go there, come back, go there, and come back, and relay the information that way, rather than having to throw them off the scent.
So why would they follow you back to your body?
Once again, lower vibrational beings, entities can follow you back to your body. Sometimes they just try and distract you or lower your vibration. Sometimes there's things called intrusive thoughts, which is coming from them. Or sometimes they just try and mess with your reality to make you fearful, to lower your vibration. Things like flickering lights or moving objects, or just really being in your space. So in order to avoid that, that's when I typically will pop in and out of different locations, sometimes on planet Earth and sometimes out there in the universe, before I come back. Yeah.
I'd love if you could guide us through one of those protection exercises that you talked about, the bubble or the cutting cords, just very briefly so people can get the sensation of when they want to do this at home and protect their space.
Yeah.
How could we start cutting the cords or protecting our environment?
Yeah, I think with any practice, it starts with quieting your mind, closing your eyes, and with the bubbling technique, for me, it's very visual. So I just really visualize myself, a bubble or an egg shape around my aura. And then I will visualize filling that egg shape up with pure white light energy. And usually that visual will do the trick. If you're not a visual person, which I know a lot of people aren't, then you can just make the statement, I am protected, I am cleared in the highest vibration for all involved. And that typically, just that statement will help, right? Or even the statement of, I cut any and all cords, I clear any and all contracts that no longer serve me for the highest good of all involved. So a statement is just as powerful as a visualization technique, but with statements especially, you really need to feel them. You really need to be present with them. You really need to feel, yes, I am protected, and if you don't feel that way at first, when you first make that statement, say it again and again and again until you really feel the resonance with it.
I love that. And there's probably people that found this episode or found this series that have already begun their journey, and maybe they're getting more into advanced, material. And there's obviously levels to this. You started off and you were getting into that trance and it took you a while. Now you're in a different level, of course. So what are some of these advanced techniques that you're implementing right now in your life that, really help you have that flow of communication and channeling with your beings, with your galactic beings?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say more so there are like two ways to communicate with extraterrestrials. One is you go to them. So I would remote view or astral travel or go to them on their ship or on their planet and communicate with them, mostly because this reality is so dense that it can be very difficult for them to come into our space. But sometimes I'll ask them to come into the room. So when I want to, it's not necessarily automatic writing, but when I'm writing down a dialogue, so I'm asking them a question and I'm writing their response, it can be a lot of work for me to pop out of my body, go up to the ship, come back into my body, type it out, go back up there. So I get through 4 or 5 questions and I'm exhausted because it's just a lot to go back and forth. So, you know, if you are at that advanced level, you can, depending on the being, you can ask them to come into the room.
Send them a calendar invite.
Exactly, Google Calendar. Hey, what's up? Not Zoom, not Google Meet, but like astral travel.
Coffee chat.
And I remember the one time I was doing this, and I asked them to come into the room, and there were 3 Pleiadian beings, and I was writing their responses, and so I invited them into my space, and I was cooking at the time, right? So I have my computer open on the kitchen table, and I was making pasta, and so I'm like, you know, it was much easier because they were just telling me as they were standing beside me what the response was, and it was, you know, I could just type it out. And then the water started boiling, and I said, oh wait, I gotta go get the food, right, or continue cooking. And so they were following me around the house, and they're like so curious as to what I was doing, and I'm like, okay, I gotta go pee, and like, please don't follow me into the bathroom, right? Like, that's considered inappropriate, you know. So it's like they were just they were not used to being here.
They're equally as curious as we are of them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I just thought that was I don't usually get the privilege of having them in my space. Usually I go to them. So it was just so funny for them to think about, you know, me cooking dinner and like having to use the bathroom and them following me around in my human life. They really enjoyed it, I think.
So we've talked about the Galactic Federation and this process so that you go up to the ship, you receive answers. We've asked you prior to this show to do a channeling based on a question that we wanted answered. And there's so many, you know, right now, so many narratives with the ET movement, what is going on, the disclosure, the governments, you know, these cover-ups, the whistleblowers, there's so much of that. So have you received any information or messages from the Galactic Federation of right now, we're in 2023, what is going on in the world right now?
I mean, I talk with them very often about what's happening, and I think that there's a theme taking place, and then there's a lot of different timelines that are emerging within that theme, underneath that umbrella. And I think we all know at this point that the theme is there's a huge shift taking place. There's a complete dismantling of the old structure of the 3D Earth, or the old Earth system. And then there's an emerging of the new Earth system, or the 5th dimension of frequency, if you want to call it that. And I think a big part of that is the collapsing of things like religions, the financial movements, even like the social structures, our political structures are all collapsing. And then there's an emerging of the truth, right? Of being aware of the agendas, of being aware of the conspiracies. And then there's an emerging of solutions, right? This is how I really see the new Earth frequency, is an emerging of taking care of plastics, taking care of pollutions, saving the environment, but also curing things like disease and cancer and free energy technology. These things have always been there, but they've been suppressed by that old world system or the powers that be. Right now, the powers that be, the shadow government, whatever you want to call them, they're losing control. They're losing power, and they are scared. They know that they are. They just simply do not have the they don't have the numbers. They never had the numbers, and it's very clear that their attempts right now are desperate.
Yeah.
They're desperately trying to lower the vibration. They're desperately trying to create more fear within humanity. And so the number one message that's been coming through from the Galactic Federation that I've been relaying for at least the past year and will continue to relay moving forward is, whatever we observe, we create collectively. So if you're observing just the agendas and you're saying, well, this is what they're doing, by observing what they are doing, we are feeding into their plan by actually amplifying what it is that they want us to create. That is how they do this. They manipulate the system. They don't have the power to create these things themselves, and they're not allowed to, right? The law of non-intervention. So what they do is they set the environment on planet Earth so that we observe what it is that they want us to observe, so that therefore we create it. So even something like a conspiracy theory of like, Project Bluebeam, right? Mm-hmm. It's like false alien invasion. Oh my goodness, they're going to create great. Well, by observing the fact that they're going to create a false alien invasion, we are creating that. Yes. And then we're confusing what real contact is versus what a manipulated contact is. And so I really urge people to take the time to assess what they are observing, to assess the information they are accessing, even it being alternative news media. That's great, but is it positive? Is it helpful? Is it helping people come together in unity and equality? Or is it actually furthering the divide, furthering the separation? Yeah. And so I think that's what's most important, is to take full radical responsibility around the fact that we are creator beings and we are contributing to the collective experience. And it's through our thoughts and our actions and our beliefs that we do that. So what are you focused on? And what are you creating, not just for yourself, but for everyone else?
And just to sort of put that all in one quote, Dr. Joe Dispenza says, "A collective network of observers creates reality." So what we're focusing on, we are going to manifest that timeline. And you have a very interesting philosophy around this, because when you started opening up your channel, your guides told you, don't look at external information, because that'll sort of taint your channel. Would you recommend that for people still when they're opening their channel?
Absolutely. I would say to decrease the amount of external information as much as possible. I think in so many ways, once again, we give our power away to these external resources. And I've always said, as a teacher or a leader myself, I tell people, I can't wait for the day when you say that you no longer need or want to watch me, because you're getting that information from yourself. That's the most important, is to understand that we all have access to this information and we don't need anything or anyone else to give that to us, even including extraterrestrials. We can go right to the source for this information. And yes, they're helpful, but we've also been them. They're not any better or even any different than we are. We're all the same. We're all incarnated beings coming from source, experiencing a lifetime, learning lessons, and trying to unpack it all.
Yeah. We have a final question for you that helps us sort of look out into the future of what is actually possible. So where would you see the world shifting when more people start activating their channel and start creating a relationship with extraterrestrials? How would the world change completely?
I think that even just the understanding or acceptance that extraterrestrials are real is going to shift everything. I think if we as a humanity can accept the presence of extraterrestrials, then what happens is we open up this planet to their help. We open up this planet to their technology, their resources, their information, their ideologies and understanding of the universe. It doesn't mean that that's the only reality, or that doesn't mean that those are the only solutions. But right now we are closed off from an entire universe because we choose to believe that we are the only thing existing in this entire universe. So I think that just the understanding that they are real is when we can start to open up that discernment and start to engage with them and allow them to help us and for us to help them in whatever capacity that may be. So I think things will shift and change dramatically when we start to accept the presence in our lives.
Well, Elizabeth, this has been a fascinating, beautiful conversation. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for all the wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I hope this has helped you open your mind to communicating with extraterrestrial life, and you're able to learn how to connect, how to protect yourself, and why this information might be important. Thank you for joining me here on Awakening the Sixth Sense. I'm your host, Emilio Ortiz, and remember, you have the keys to unlocking your own abilities.